Yes, it's time for The World This Week. Let's say hello to Mark Burley from the French news agency AFP.
Nice to be back.
Just back from a long stint in Greece.
Well, there was a bit of action down there you might have heard about.
Yeah. It's subsided for now.
Yeah, well,
but,
this being Europe, has subsided for how many months? That's the question.
Or how many weeks, perhaps. Also with us, Michael Kirtley, producer of the World Memory Film Project. Nice to see you, Michael. We're going to dive right into it after we tell you that The World This Week is on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag F24Debate. Call it the return of the prodigal son. The red carpet being rolled out in Nairobi. We're expecting there the U.S. President Barack Obama to descend, his first return to his father's country since he became president. And while he may be American, he sure sounds like Kenya's most popular politician these days.
He's from here. He's one of our own, and we are really prepared to welcome him and give him a heroic surprise.
As Kenyans, we're excited, obviously. Obama is a big part of us. Yeah, I'd say we're happy.
I got a 10-liter keg waiting just in case, anyone calls me to deliver it to him, because that would be a great honor.
All right, ready to deliver a 10-liter keg if need be. Obama, who is about, again, who has just arrived in Kenya, just arriving in our studios. Anne-Elisabeth Mute.
Hello.
Of Sunday Telegraph fame. Nice to see you as well. Let me begin with you, Michael Kirtley. Barack Obama couldn't go to Kenya before.
Yes, he couldn't go there because of the president of Kenya, Mr. Kenyatta, who has been under indictment from the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity during the election process. And I think that it's very interesting how we're capable after a while to sort of whitewash these sorts of things. But Kenya is very much in need of this kind of visit. I mean, Kenya, as we all know, has been subject to terrorist attacks from Shabab out of Somalia that have been very deadly. The image of Kenya has suffered greatly, and there's no doubt that President Obama going there symbolically anyway for Kenya is a big boost to their morale, that they needed it badly. I'm wondering myself, Obama has not been particularly legendary in the way that he's dealt with Africa since he was elected. His most famous claim to fame is the fact that he was from Africa in part. And I think that this is rather problematic in thinking about the legacy of Obama in terms of Africa. President Bush, despite what anybody might think of him, he did a lot to promote the relations with Africa and to promote certainly in the fight against AIDS and things like that. Obama hasn't left that kind of legacy. So I think that this particular visit to his home country, to the people that are definitely in need of support, has the symbolic value that for Africa itself is very important. I just hope that he takes advantage of this time to bring up really important issues in Africa.
Well, he is going to bring those up. Most notably, he's visiting what is the commercial hub of East Africa, and as well, he's going to travel on afterwards to Ethiopia for a big conference there. And as we look at those images of him on Kenyan soil, it's a far cry from the one he described in his book when he described his first trip as just out of college in Barack Obama at the time.
Don't ask me about his book. I haven't read it.
But Mark Burley, your thoughts on Barack Obama in Kenya, and we were talking about it earlier with a correspondent who said, here's a man who you could say this facetiously is Kenya's most popular politician.
I think it's really interesting to see the president go there. I'm not sure, just purely looking at the office of president, there's any real need for him to go there. And you can't forget that it's one of the most corrupt countries. It's got a lot of problems that basically no other president would endorse. But of course, given his heritage, this carries a lot more. I mean, it's basically family baggage, isn't it? No one's going to really look at the trade issues that he's raising or the other issues during this. It's really thinking about his father, his grandfather, his roots there. It's
and yet he's not visiting his home village.
Well, I think he sort of said, well, suffocating security. I mean, you talked about Shabab and all the rest of it. Security is extremely high, and I'm sure that they're going to do everything that he's not in an exposed place. And, you know, his village, he said, if I recall rightly, he said that he would rather see the place, honestly, as a private citizen. That would hold a lot more meaning to him than as a president who is essentially shuttled around in these big black SUVs from a conference hall to a high security hotel. You know, it's his ancestral country, but he's not going to see a lot of it.
All right, for the trip, you mentioned security. Kenya deploying some 10,000 police officers. That's 1/4 of the country's police force. Truckers are grumbling. The main highway to the coastal city of Mombasa is shut. Most, though, taking it in stride and having a laugh about it when they see how U.S. media have been spinning the story. That was the strap on one cable news network. Security fears as Obama heads to terror hotbeds. Anne-Elisabeth Guité.
Yes, I mean, you know, they do this everywhere. They do this in London. They do this in Paris. The security of American presidents is a case of that cannot possibly be overkill. You know, you do not want to be the person on whose watch something bad happened, and the reaction is you don't get to see them at all. The security is huge and well known to everyone who approaches, even you know, several blocks away. The security, it's too little, too late, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. What can we say? What's very interesting, and you look at this on those images, is how very un-Kenyan he actually looks. You know, I mean, he really is the American visiting. He has, as Michael said, George W. Bush did much more for Africa, much longer, with a much more sustained way, and Obama, who was supposed not to be interested in Europe, but interested in the Third World and interested in the Pacific, has not done anything either for Africa or the Pacific. And there's this kind of strange disconnect that you see at the end of the day.
But that's a bit unfair. They are working on trade partnerships.
Yeah, but China
they always work on trade partnerships. I mean, there's not something. There was a great deal done before him by a number of presidents, including, you know, Bill Clinton too, Jimmy Carter, who is not somebody I usually support, but in that respect was very good on that too. So no, I don't. But you know, it's better than nothing. I would say that Kenya is a country that has, yes, corruption, but it's not the only African country that has corruption. It has been attacked by terrorists, but it's also a country that has fantastic growth. It's a kind of growth that we in the first world dream about. So they have cohabiting bad conditions and really good ones, and they are next to really sort of dangerous hotspots of Africa. And so the idea that you go and give them a bit of support is not entirely wrong. The excuse, you know, we didn't want to go and visit President Kenyatta before, and now we visit President Kenyatta. It's, you know, either you go...
You don't want to be in the photo op with a guy who's indicted by the ICC.
He still is indicted by the ICC, as far as I know. So
no, those charges were dropped.
They were all dropped?
Against Kenyatta, yes. He won't be seen with his vice president, however.
This is true.
Mr. Ruto. Michael Kirtley, on this issue, isn't it a bit unfair because we say, yes, Obama has not provided the kind of millennial goal pledges that he got from George W. Bush, but does doing a lot for Africa basically mean giving handouts, giving aid?
I don't think it's about giving out handouts, but in the same period that Obama has been in power, the Chinese have basically taken over so much of the infrastructure work, so much of the trade
not
capability.
From the United States.
No, but that's what I'm saying. The United States has lost a lot of that. The biggest influence that Obama has had in terms of Africa during this time has been militarily. In terms of West Africa, the fight against terrorism, in terms of certainly AFRICOM, the broad brush military unit that handles everything related to Africa, has gained in influence during the time that he has been there. But I think that we will look back at this period and say that trade, there were big opportunities that existed with Africa. There were opportunities not only in terms of trade, but also in terms of influencing not so much in terms of humanitarian aid, but in terms of, I mean, Obama had, if anyone had the ability to speak from the pulpit, it would have been Obama towards Africa, but he has not so far taken advantage of that to the extent that he could have.
Yes.
And on this issue of tackling security matters, we saw Barack Obama taken to task this week by Nigeria's president because he wants more military hardware sent his way. Has the United States done enough? We know they're ahead of spearheading a lot of the efforts to take on the al-Shabaab militias or to support the African Union troops that are fighting inside of Kenya's neighbor to the north, Somalia. What more can the United States do on that score?
I think that the real question has to do, as was brought up earlier, with the corruption in Africa. It may be true that Kenya is not that much worse than many other African countries, but it's equally true that giving aid of any kind, and certainly militaristic aid, is subject to what happens due to that corruption. And so I think that the United States and other Western powers that have contributed militarily to Africa has either been in terms of sales of armament, in terms of training of military, or in terms of actual on-the-ground action such as the drones in Niger or what they're doing in Somalia. I think that obviously more could be done, but there's also a question of sovereignty. Many of these countries have not expressed the desire to have. I mean, for a long time, AFRICOM was looking for a place to call its home in Africa, and until the rise of Boko Haram in Nigeria and concomitant to the fall of Gaddafi, they weren't really given that opportunity to have that particular type of foothold. Now Chad has given it to them, Niger has given it to them, Kenya has given it to them, and so I think that circumstances have given the United States much more potential there. In terms of Nigeria, I think they will probably give a lot more military aid because of the fight against Boko Haram.
All right, the fight against Boko Haram, the fight against Islamist radicals taking a new turn on Turkey's border this week, and it could well be a turning point. Ankara pounding ISIS positions for a second day, this time using Air Force jets in a week that started with a suicide attack that killed several dozen student activists in the border town of Suruc. Ankara, for the first time, taking the fight to the jihadists after months of resistance. Turkey, a NATO member, now finally agreeing to let the U.S.-led coalition use its airbase in Incirlik, also another base in Diyarbakir, which is in the fight against Boko Haram. The Islamists of ISIS.
As of this morning, our armed forces, in the framework of the orders that they received, destroyed the IS targets, which have the potential to threaten Turkey on the Syrian border, with a success ratio of 100%.
It goes further than that, Mark Burley, because now Turkey is saying they're also going to deploy their own jets in those U.S.-led airstrikes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. This could very much be a turning point. They were resisting it, and as you would have all known, there were, voices from some quarters wondering what sort of collaboration might have been going on in the past between Turkish intelligence services and the nascent groups that have produced Daesh, ISIS, and so on. To sort of see an open confrontation like this, and perhaps even moving towards a plan that's been out there for about a year or two now of creating a buffer zone along the border, which Turkey was strongly resisting, but now seems possibly could be moving towards. I think it's all very significant, yeah.
I think it's very interesting. I mean, they have been playing a very strange game because there was this dream of Erdogan of being the regional power and having kind of complex alliances with various parties without deciding very well. But I think it's very significant that the suicide bombing was carried out by an extremist Kurd, and that the Kurdish party, which is not at all extremist, won votes far beyond the Kurdish voters in Turkey. And I think this government now is faced with a different way of acting firmly, which is the Turkish reaction generally. Order and no disorder is something that the Turks believe in, and I think they somehow found themselves in a situation that would make them even more unpopular, and at the same time they could see the possibility of taking the initiative in domestic politics. And I think it plays a part. It's sincere because Turks detest disorder, they detest attacks, and they are they fall down very heavily on that sort of thing. So that's a natural reflex, but that's also a reflex that will be much simpler to understand that all the equivocation that went on beforehand, and that's probably going to help them in the political midterm.
You mentioned, and it's very important, the identity of that 20-year-old student who had disappeared, possibly to go train over the border somewhere. We don't quite know where. His mother quoted in the newspaper as saying that the other brother may have gone to Saudi Arabia in 2013. And it shows the challenge now. It perhaps explains in part why Recep Tayyip Erdogan was reticent to take on ISIS head-on, because so many of those jihadists will be homegrown.
Yes, because the idea that we are going to be the great Islamist power, going to prove that you can be Islamist and you can be close to a first world nation, etc. But you don't. The idea that you can make those deals, it doesn't work, and the danger is now coming home to them. And we've seen how the reactions against the PKK, who are not necessarily using nice means, but the idea that suddenly
they murdered 2 policemen this week.
They were not just policemen. I mean, it was I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying that it's the sort of killing that would have been undertaken by the IRA at the time of the Troubles. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying it was understandable. It was just some random policemen. They had been involved in other things. But in this respect, it makes things much clearer in Turkey.
All right, we're going to pick up on that with the rest of our panel when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week.